Legendary Pokemon, the peak of power in the series, are beings that play with the roles of the game and define the forms of the very existence of this universe. Very, very powerful creatures. But who would win if only one could remain? How are they arranged? From the weakest to the strongest. This is the tier list of every legendary and mythical Pokemon of the series, based on their canonical power. And this is hard, you know. It's difficult to be strict about it when the canon has continuous changes and contradictions, but it could be worse. It could be a Smash Bros tier list with Steve somewhere. So we will consider absolutely everything, from Pokemon entries, tales and legends, their role in anime, manga, movies, and even specific feats that showcase their power, so that the picture we have of each one is as complete and fair as possible, at least for the chaos that is the series. If a Pokemon has several forms, we will judge only the most powerful or final one. I'm not going to count Ultra Beasts, as they have some things in common but are not generally considered legendary by the official media, and this tier doesn't intend to order them as to who would win against each other. One from a lower tier could perfectly counter one from above. You can see it as a rank that orders who has the most destructive powers, or if you prefer, who would have the most chances of winning in a hypothetical Pokemon Battle Royale. So please keep your mind in a happy place, because we are not doing a whole thesis about it. Everything's just for fun, alright? And speaking of fun, let's start with the only level in the entire video that's relatively easy. F tier. The game emphasizes how Cosmog and Cosmoem are two of the most defenseless life forms in the universe, which is kinda funny because a neutron star isn't exactly harmless. We could talk later about what it does when it finishes evolving. For now, however, this Pokemon is not capable of using offensive moves. At some point it shows some of its potential, but exposing both the player and it to danger, so I don't know to what extent we can consider it something positive. Cosmoem is quite sturdy and learns cosmic power. Maybe it could boost its defenses as high as possible and then teleport from one place to another to try and survive the battle royale. But we have like 100 creatures left, so let's leave the crazy divagations for another day. After the getting the bag level, we are now in tier E, with Pokemon no longer useless and hopeless in battle, but still extremely weak for their condition. Melton barely squeezes in here. It can use modest attacks that make it not totally helpless like the previous ones, but it's so small we must protect it. Kubfu is a small step forward in terms of strength. It's a rookie fighter, but it gives it all, and personally I consider it as the second stage of a starter in terms of strength. And then there's this being from hell. Seriously, I love it, but in the games the role of this buddy has always been so weird. It's Manaphy's offspring and it cannot evolve into it, so what's the point? In battle, however, it doesn't defend that badly, even being the cheap version of its parent. It has decent stats, slightly above average for its type, and its D are like the Senzu beans of this universe, curing any disease, so maybe it could have a chance to survive a little longer in that warfare, doing the same as me since I opened this channel, drinking your own tears. The D tiers kinda Type Null was created with great aspirations to be the chimera that replicates the ideal of God, described in ancient texts, and a ruthless hunter of Ultra Beasts. It's a pity we have never seen it in action against the Ultra Beasts, because that's the mission for which it was supposedly created. If it had ever done that in a good way, maybe I would have given it more consideration, but in the end it ended up being a species that has not proven anything, with a helmet that limits its power, slows it down, and takes away its main ability. Next are the Royal 3, legendaries with an incredible and memorable story, but who, in terms of power, can hardly justify their status. They were a group of 3 weak and not outstanding Pokemon with a burning ambition to become the very best. Pecharon somehow granted them with their wish, hypnotizing them with its mochis. legendaries. And the game clearly shows how getting things all of a sudden instead of with effort and patience left them with huge flaws and resulted in a very bad ending for them. Serendipity was a dull and short-winged bird that failed to stand out, but throughout the moches, it received the gift of becoming extremely beautiful and refined, developing powerful pheromones that captivate and leave weak spirits helpless. This way, it could make them dance to its tune and easily defeat common Pokemon. But of course, we are talking about legendaries. Such pheromones were already shown to be useless in battle against an angry Ogerpon, so they probably couldn't be very effective against the creatures on this list. Other than that, its capabilities are that of a completely average Pokemon. This is very well reflected in how, despite the fact that as a legendary it has high stats, the distribution is done in a way that makes it still mediocre. Okidogi was the one who led the way in the battle against Ogerpon. It has a tremendous brute force, but not even helped by the pheromones of Serendipity and Munkidori reading the future were rivals for it. Apparently it was a weak and squalid Pokemon until eating Pechoran's mochis granted its wish to gain more strength, so maybe it's unable to control all the power it suddenly gained and that's why they lost. It's the strongest member of the group, but probably it's not about the level of a pseudo-legendary or a well-trained common Pokemon. Munkidori was a clumsy and dim-witted Pokemon that was the laughingstock of the forest and dreamed of being smarter. After eating Pechoran's mochis, it tricked its subconscious to temporarily become one of the most intelligent Pokemon. Such was the intellect that Munkidori learned to read the intentions of others like an open book, in such a way that it seemed to see the future with absolute clarity. For me, it's the royal three that most could defend itself, because although legendary Pokemon are usually smarter than average, few, if any, have such a sophisticated ability of anticipation. Root and Volcanion are strong, but also two of the most mundane beings on the list. The first is the king of the jungle, that, like a good king of the jungle, adopted a child, but apart from being quite aggressive, obviously strong and making the most of its environment, becoming a difficult opponent in its habitat, Zarude is the mythical Pokemon who least deserves that level left, in my opinion. Especially considering that they live in packs, which is like the opposite of something called mythical. Are they not the rarest beings in the universe? But Volcanion is even more ordinary. At least Zarude has all that myth of the child it raised that gives it a certain vibe of legend and folktale, but nothing in this creature makes you think it's a legendary Pokemon and not a gourmety. It expels steam of high pressure and that's it. Heatran is quite similar. I give it a few extra points because in a volcano, its favorite habitat, it becomes one with the environment and is considered almost invincible. But outside of that very situational advantage, it's a really dull Pokemon. This one makes me have nightmares from the little VGC I have played with Trick Room. It destroyed everything, but canonically this story seems different. Its strength is overwhelming, but it doesn't have any special abilities that make it stand out, and its lack of intellect without its rider make it extremely limited and easy to defeat by legendary standards. Magiarna is another mystery that hasn't shown a lot of itself, and it's the first on the list in which we begin to see somewhat higher skills. The exceptional genius who created it 500 years ago did so by concentrating life energy into its core, known as the soul heart. This allowed it to perceive emotions and feelings in a very powerful way, but it's known that to protect those it loves, Magiarna can fire its flare cannon, that same vital energy in the form of a devastating beam. Magiarna isn't specialized in combat, but with such a powerful beam and such abilities, it could cause quite a bit of destruction. Shaming is similar, a hard head and a little more, and it's somewhat painful because its Sky form is one of my favorites and some of the most curious previous things we've seen in the competitive. Canonically speaking, its main skill is to purify the air, and its great strength is the seed flare that it releases after accumulating enough pollution. But Shaman is extremely fragile, and besides that one hit that it can use just like that, it doesn't have very outstanding offensive tools. Cresselia is a benevolent angel. If we talk about pure power and potential, it's probably quite above the ones at this level. It can resist attacks like no other, and the fact that a single one of its feathers affects so intensely someone's dreams says a lot about its innate power. But Cresselia hates fighting, which has made it specialize in healing skills and white magic, where it's the best. If we were to judge this Pokemon by how valuable it would be as an ally, it would be in the first places. But in a battle royale, all against all, or when it comes to causing destruction, it's quite unfortunate. Even its best technique consists in sacrificing herself for someone else. The Regis have in their favor that they are the first to earn the title of legend, a legend that has been passed down from generation to generation. They are Pokemon unexpectedly skilled for battle, but no less limited. The legendary Titans don't have a developed consciousness, being basically automatons that simply follow orders. Their great asset is their resistance, being invulnerable to normal attacks, but their offensive capabilities are also very limited. An elite trainer with good Pokemon could face them and even dominate them, as we have seen more than once. And these two have grown up quite a bit, but that's as far as they have come. Despite the brutal upgrade from its pre-evolution, and after earning legendary status for how it was rebirthed in the Iron Age, Melmetal is another extremely mundane Pokemon. Its strength is massive, and it has what's considered one of the most powerful punches in the Pokemon world. But as we have been seeing, a hard hit is not enough to win at this point. Urshifu's line, like Gapu, gives a lot of starter Pokemon vibes. If the first one was a starter of intermediate stage, this would be an always good Charizard. But despite having its shortcomings, Gapu has trained like no one else, to the point of mastering two unique fighting styles in the world, a milestone that no one else has achieved. In my eyes, it's a Pokemon without much innate power, but because of its dedication and sacrifice, it's truly special and admirable. Zeraora is another member of the club of Pokemon supposedly gifted for battle, but unremarkable for the treatment that the series has given them. But we can rescue some feats that add points, such as its victory in the anime against Guzzlord, a species that in another universe ate the world. Literally, we see some apocalyptic ruins in its path and a Guzzlord eating what is left of civilization. That's an apocalyptic threat that Zeraora defeats in the anime, of course, but we can give it some extra points that make Zeraora stand out among similar Pokemon for me. Steel Valley improves notably when its power is unlocked, being able to make full use of its ability and increasing its speed, but it's still an Arceus bootleg, and that's enough for me to not put it on the next level. And finally, this hurts me, to be honest. I wanted to put them higher, but they have nothing left to show. The legendary Musketeers are powerful heroes committed to saving Pokemon from the abuse of humans, with some feats to their credit. For example, Terrakion destroyed the castle and the entire army that protected it with his own strength to save those who were inside, but that doesn't seem like such a great fit for a legendary, and apart from being experienced in swordplay and having an unwavering sense of justice, let's give them a couple of claps and keep going. Ogerpon is agile, a good fighter, and has devastating kicking power. It alone defeated 3 legendary Pokemon, which, as we have already seen, are not the strongest and have many flaws, but it must be said that they do complement each other very well, and together they could have surely defeated all the Pokemon we have seen so far. And it didn't even wear its masks. With this, its destructive skills increased significantly using the power of the terrestrial phenomenon. But most of all, it has a great ability to adapt according to the type of the opponent it faces. We are now talking about above average Pokemon. C tier. This is the turning point. From here we find Pokemon that transcend normality, with unreal abilities, devastating natural powers that out of control could cause great destruction in the world. And Regieleki, who is the fastest Pokemon in the universe? Of course, Regigigas, with what it costs you to move continents, go ahead and create a being of 320 pounds that moves at the speed of light, no problem. But this is Pokemon, so let's once again ignore the laws of physics, which still gives us a species clearly above its siblings with such speed applied to combat. Above everyone except Regidrago, the best attacker of all, with a body formed based on the crystallization of abnormal amounts of dragon energy, the essence of the most powerful type, materialized in a Pokemon. They are undoubtedly the two spoiled children of the group, and Patreon would claim to this place. Despite the fact that its strength is nothing world-beating, its unique power is still one of the most broken in the Pokemon world for a scenario like this. No matter how small it may be, every Pokemon or person has dark ambitions within themselves, which this being, with its moches, uses to particularly satisfy to control their actions in return. Patreon is extremely intelligent, so it's not hard to think that in a battle royale of legendaries, this creature could end up with an army formed by the most ordinary ones that it could utilize with its ability. Other than that, it's one of the most helpless Pokemon on the roster, but it has also proven to be extremely tough. So even if its plan failed, it could run away and rethink its strategy. If it were to act strategically, it could use those abilities to stay in a safe place and wait for the best opportunity to have the upper hand against some opponents with its developed psychic powers. However, the pride of its new smarts made Patreon neglect its body, so any hit on the scale of power will KO it. The legendary birds and bees could all be in a similar range for me. Each one has its own traits, with some having more innate power and the others having Ho-Oh's influence in resurrecting them. Both have been attributed to quite miraculous abilities, such as Suicune, the reincarnation of the North Wind that purifies water as it passes by, or Entei, and its ability to make volcanoes erupt. There's not much to talk about the birds. It is known that breaking the balance between them would put the ecosystem of a large area of the world at risk. All of them are extremely dangerous beings that together could make things very ugly. Just above them would be the forces of nature, led by Landorus, the strongest of the three. Like the legendary birds, their collisions devastate the lands they pass throughout, as a collateral effect without even intending to do so, in a more violent way and with consequences that last longer than Articuno's, Zapdos, and Moltres. Landorus is introduced as the leader of the group, who not only stops them when they wreak havoc, but takes the energy from their attacks to convert it into a positive energy that blesses the lands and compensates for the damage. Starting to sound like pretty holy capabilities. Right, you exist. Let's just place it next to its siblings. And now, the moment that absolutely no one expected. Spectrier, who stands far above its steep pal to me. Not only does the game refer to Spectrier as a much more thoughtful, cautious, and intelligent being, but it also has the ability to absorb life force, and its kicks are quite powerful, and it's much nicer in the VZ. Keldeo would go ahead of its masters because its legend explicitly says that it surpassed them in a short time, and with its resolute form, its sword cuts throughout everything. Although I don't think that's literal, but this is hard, you know? According to their legend, the four treasures of ruin went berserk and caused a disaster that almost completely destroyed the entire kingdom of Paldea. We can therefore assume that together they have the strength to devastate a region. The guardian deities are souls born for war, specialized in battle. Unlike the vast majority of legendaries, they were born for it. And until they decided to stop being involved in human affairs, they spent hundreds of years fighting each other in the countless wars between islands that devastated the region, which speaks volumes for their destructive capability. Separately, we see them in the game standing up to the Ultrabeasts, beings that have, once again, been shown to be capable of bringing their own worlds to an end, so I think they deserve this place. Latios and Latias are, on the contrary, very kind Pokemon that hate to fight, but a basic description speaks for them. They have immense psychic powers, can fly at the speed of sound, can become invisible, and even take on the appearance of human beings that have been engraved in their hearts. But what characterizes them above all things is an incomparable perception of feelings and emotions, disappearing if they sense danger. That's why only trainers with a pure heart and action replay meet them. Yes, I said that I was only going to put up the final forms, but don't ask questions. This never happened. Manaphy was a candidate to be much lower, close to Fiona in terms of combat skills, but has an ace that gives it an extremely dangerous niche also in battle. Can exchange two body souls. Apparently, under the sea, this power spreads and expands much more effectively, increasing its effects around it. If Manaphy set its mind to it with that ability, it could manage to form a fearsome army of water Pokemon to obliterate everything in its path. Although, luckily, it's one of the sweetest and most noble Pokemon in existence. What a great and underrated Pokemon movie. The shy Marshadow specializes in a unique technique. It infiltrates the opponent's shadow and copies their abilities and strength. While I have some doubts that this could apply to beings in another scale of power, clearly it would give Marshadow a great chance of winning. And as undisputed leaders of this tier, we have the Supreme Galarian Legendary Birds. They could actually be in the same tier as the originals in terms of pure strength, and their role in the world is also much less visible, but when it comes to fighting, oh boy, they are like a 3.0 version. Articuno's psychic powers affect its opponents at a cellular level, to the point where they can seem frozen, even without it being ice type, because what's being affected is their mind. Zapdos is constantly challenging more powerful opponents, so its wings have deteriorated and its electric power dissipated, and yet its attacks are so swift that it's still mistaken for lightning, an even more devastating one. Moltres is not as skilled with fire, but its evil energy burns and scorches the soul of its opponent much more irreversibly. It's amazing how the Galarian forms didn't just make a perfect type triangle while also reinterpreting their original abilities, but in terms of their strengths, the new legendary birds are just that, slightly more lethal versions than the originals, but not that different in power. Did you get it, kiddos? Time to eat lots of fruit to be a little bit stronger and evil. Inaugurating the third highest level. Wind King and Iron Serpent are both creatures of Paradox who, according to all writings, ended the world in their respective timelines. Koraidon split the earth with the power of its fists, so it could be associated with a mass extinction of the prehistoric era, while Miraidon, in the blink of an eye, reduced large cities to ashes with the power of its lighting and could be connected to the fall of civilization in the distant future. But of course, we know how difficult it's to discern what's real and what's made up when talking about Paradox Pokemon, and if it's true that these creatures caused such destruction somewhere, we don't even know if they are unique species and did it by themselves, since the two specimens we see in the game come from different universes, so that's an explanation for their very different character, or whether they were armies of these Pokemon that together caused such devastation. We are dealing with the most complex lore of the franchise, so the best we can do is focus on the events we see directly in the game. The Paradise Protection Protocol is an AI-based defense program that became self-aware and was willing to go much further than the professor in order to defend the project. The first security level is a perfect team formed by Paradox Pokemon, the elite of power from remote times, against which not even the most powerful champion in the region would stand a chance. If this team is defeated, the second security level is activated, with Koraidon and Miraidon, the Paradise Guardians. So it could be reasonable to think that this Pokemon alone is more powerful than the rest of Paradoxes together. It's very tricky to interpret the info, but personally I could put them around here. What do you think? With much stronger Pokemon and threats that make them almost impossible to beat, the Pink Princess is really a monster that can even create diamonds out of nothing? What? Maybe it could mass produce precious minerals and collapse the world economic order, which couldn't be bad at all. But apparently that ability comes from having control over the carbon in its surroundings, be it in the atmosphere or its opponent. The fact that it could technically mineralize its rival to death is an instantaneous and cruel KO for me, although it's probably a process that requires high amounts of energy on its part and cannot just do it always. Apart from that, as a carving mutation, the Yancy is also extremely resistant and quite strong. Sticking with the theme of underrated divas in terms of power but quite monstrous beings, if you think about it, we have Meloetta. Using sound as a source of power is nothing new in the series. We have already talked several times about the possibility of a new type with that name, but Meloetta is that concept taken to the goddess level. She has a voice capable of reaching all the notes and sound frequencies that exist, having absolute control and knowledge of them, and being able to infuse any sensation, mood, or feeling in the opponent. Basically, it can sing to make almost anything happen to you, leave you at its mercy, and the scariest thing is that its moves have an even wider range. It's said that many popular songs in the Pokemon world were inspired by Meloetta's moves, so I like to think that the soundtrack of the games is actually its creation. Meloetta is Junichi Masuda. Maybe it should be even higher after all. Genesect is also quite underrated, but for me it stays here. It could easily surpass those just mentioned, and many others with powers considered divine and miraculous, because being an automaton, some kind of powers could not affect Genesect at all. But it's said that it still retains some essence of the prehistoric Pokemon that dominated the forest. Can you imagine it? An era in which much more powerful versions of today's already strong fossil Pokemon in habitat dominated by this artificially enhanced Pokemon whose weaknesses have been removed, with drives to adapt to any situation. Genesect is the most ruthless killer of the whole tier list. No matter how disconnected it is from divine ideas like other legendaries, it could get pretty far in that challenging battle. Xerneas has the gift of eternal life and can share it with others. We will talk more about it later, but for now let's accept that it could be able to use that life energy in devastating attacks if it deems that is necessary and opportune. Now it's turn of the last group of minor legendaries we will see, and therefore the canonically strongest in my opinion: Azelf, Mesprit, and Uxie. I think that everything about their role in the world's genesis should be taken with a grain of salt, but even without that, they are the Pokemon of willpower, emotions, knowledge, and the specific abilities that derive from this are fearsome. Uxie, with just a glance, can erase memories, and with it, a great part of the abilities and skills of an opponent in battle. Azelf can leave the attacker without any willpower, making all of its actions meaningless and practically leaving it paralyzed. Unfortunately, we haven't seen such a materialization of Mesprit's emotion powers, but we can expect something similar to its siblings, perhaps provoking the feelings it wants in the opponent at will, somewhat similar to Meloetta's music but more deeply and irreversibly by affecting the pure root of emotions. They are the first Pokemon we have seen to be treated by the series as deities, and it makes perfect sense. And speaking of little fates with power at an interplanetary level, Jirachi. It's all very contradictory in terms of this ability to fulfill wishes, from the soft version of the anime that could only teleport things, to the Mr. Dungeon version that can fulfill wishes but within a very limited range, to the manga version version that apparently can make any wish come true in the Emerald Arc. By pure logic, I could opt from an intermediate option, that Jirachi can fulfill wishes but within its capabilities and without being able to affect Pokemon more powerful than it. If so, this tier of extraordinary powerful Pokemon but that still have their limitations seems adequate to me. And speaking of miracles, Mew is another difficult one since there are too many factors and back and forths in its lore to be considered. Originally it was going to be a god, but nowadays the most accepted version is that Mew is the ancestor of all species, the first one to be created, from which all the others come from. References to its strength in the games are very scarce, and I don't think it's the main point of the Pokemon, but it's supposed to be able to use most attacks of all types. I don't think its transformation applies to absolutely everything. From an evolutionary standpoint, I don't really see much sense in it. Its clone, Mewtwo, unlike the original, was conceived for battles as the ultimate Pokemon, the top of the pyramid created to never lose. But times are complicated. It's a killing machine, which secluded itself in the place of the most dangerous Pokemon to become even stronger, showing its fighting spirit and continuous improvement. Its power could possibly be enough to destroy a region, and the best trainers could have to unite to fight Mewtwo and prevent it. But if you try to go farther and end the world, there could probably be beings on a whole different level who could stop it. And it's time to move on because they cannot be any higher than this. I'm sorry. It's kinda bitter for me to put the reason for my interest in Pokemon and why I am here today as the lowest game mascot, but it's not like they are weak. The one known to humans as Guardian of the Seas has abilities to stop all three legendary birds at the same time, plus control over the tides. So we start talking about beings quite crucial to the balance of the world. Ho-Oh doesn't seem to have a similar role, but it's one of the few we have seen controlling life. It can not only resurrect the dead, but bring back a buffed version of them. To finish with the Johto legendaries, Celebi travels throughout time with complete ease. And at first we might have considered that simply transporting throughout time wasn't that useful of an ability for battle, but time puts everything in its place. In the Heart Gold and Soul Silver event, we saw how Celebi can indeed not only travel but also transport others. We don't know if it's at will or only under certain circumstances, but if it's the former, a little bit of imagination is enough to find a way to defeat practically any opponent without even trying. At least the ones we've seen so far, of course. This thing is the biggest pain in the whole video. It's so inconsistent. It can move anything between dimensions. Even the mysterious rings of auras have a similarity, but I find it hard to believe that it's actually the one in control. It could, however, use that ability in a similar way to Celebi, and its unbound form is much more powerful, so we have to put it a bit on top. Just try to get close to Darkrai. It's not widely known that it's actually a docile Pokemon that only attacks when someone it cares about is threatened or the world is in danger, but its power is so massive that it cannot control it, and it causes terrible nightmares all around it, even when trying not to. There have been documented cases of sensitive people being affected by Darkrai's powers hundreds of miles away, even with the poor Pokemon trying to control it. Imagine what it could do to a real enemy releasing all its powers. Unlike other Pokemon that use dream abilities and need the enemy to sleep first, its nightmares blur the barrier between dream and reality, and once in its world, Darkrai is invincible. In case it wasn't clear, we are already in a range of power where anything could happen. To their legend, Reshiram and Zekrom have enough power to destroy the world. In fact, they supposedly already did it once. However, I find it quite difficult to believe and make it fit in the history of the Pokemon world that Reshiram and Zekrom destroyed destroy the world as such. For me, they just provoked an immense war, affecting several kingdoms in which they caused great devastation, which already seems to me a scale of destruction enough to be at this level. White and Black Huron are a mystery. By logic, they would have to be stronger, although, as their similar stats point out, being a forced and unnatural attempt of fusion taints their original essence and their strength doesn't increase as much. Personally, I could put them at a similar level, although what is clear is that both are far from the idea of totality and invincibility of the original dragon, which if it materializes in a Pokemon someday could probably fight to crown this tier list. But for now, why do you have to exist? I love them, but it's so hard to get anything straight out of Galar Heroes. It's not confirmed, but everything seems to indicate that it was Calyrex, the king of Galar 20,000 years ago, who stopped Eternatus when it arrived on Earth. The specific circumstances of that confrontation, if it really happened, are a mystery, and because I don't want to turn this video into a half-hour theory of each legendary, let's assume that Calyrex somehow defeated the original Eternatus and Sashan and Samacenta beat it in the first Darkest Day 3,000 years ago in an even more powerful version, to then join us and our rival during the events of the game and face its final version, even more enhanced by the influence of Rose. But we managed to control it because, haha, Dusk Ball. Anyway, all the protagonists of this confrontation seem to respond to the general idea of the generation, heroics at the key moment. I think it's clear that they are all weaker than Eternatus, but at the moment of truth they gave their best and released a power that no one expected. And the mere fact of keeping at bay one of the biggest threats in the universe makes them deserve to play in this league. Calyrex dominated the steeds that wreaked havoc wherever they went with its mere presence, and in a single night moved an entire forest, saving creatures and vegetation. I think they certainly deserve the honor of leading a category like this, and inaugurate the next one. Threats at an interplanetary level that could end all forms of life if they wanted to. Yveltal. I know we put Chernias half an hour ago, and in theory they are equally strong since their concept is life and death as a cycle, so they both depend on and therefore must have equivalent strengths, but fuck it. Death and destruction always in my team. Even if their strengths are equal on paper, Yveltal is much more lethal. While Chernias is all about sharing the life and energy that it has gathered, Yveltal is the literal opposite. As Glastier, it absorbs the opponent's life energy, but in God mode, stealing the life of everything in the area, turning it into a dead wasteland while keeping all the energy for itself. It's like an evil flying Genkidama. But contrary to popular belief, it's not an evil Pokemon, and it only absorbs the life necessary to continue living when it sees that its days are coming to an end. But just imagine if it were to go beyond that, absorbing the life of a forest, with that new power the life of a whole region, with that new power the life of the whole world, and from there to wherever you want to imagine. Regigigas reaches this height point by accomplishing two of the most incredible feats on the entire list. The first one is shaping the continents with its bare hands, probably the most impressive feat of brute strength we will ever see in a creature. And second, and not least, the ability to not just revive Pokemon like Ho-Oh, but to create life from nothing, with life forms as extreme as the Regis. Although humans, fearful of Regigigas, took advantage of its exhaustion to seal its powers, I don't doubt that it could put the whole world in check if it wanted to, assuming it could create an army of Regis. But at last, Navi is back in the form of Solgaleo and Lunala as emissaries of the Sun and Moon. Unfortunately, the series hasn't given many details of their full power, but their bodies can hold the energy of the Sun, so perhaps we could compare it to a small star. That would make both of them automatically a much higher threat than the rest of the game masters. mascots. Groudon and Kyogre are also perfectly capable of ending the world, this time not only because of their legend, but the very events we see in the game. What would have happened without the protagonist or Rayquaza to appease them? Not only that, Rayquaza defeated them long ago in their original versions, much more terrible than the ones in the game that threatens the world. Speaking of the level of threat it poses, in a single attack, it disintegrated a meteorite that, according to Devon's scientists, would have destroyed the Earth several times over. So we can assume that the impact or direct force of this attack is even greater than that meteorite, which gives us an idea of what would happen if Rayquaza were to direct it towards us. Luckily, it's on our side, defending the Earth from outside threats. Meanwhile, Zygarde protects it from the inside. And because of its parallels and similar role, I could say that in its complete form, it has a power similar to Rayquaza. This time, it defends the world's ecosystems and its balance. Let's say, for example, if for some reason the balance of Xerneas and Yveltal were to be broken, it would take this complete form to return things to their natural order, as Rayquaza does with Groudon and Kyogre. With both Rayquaza and Zygarde surpassing their two trio mates, it seems clear that they could put the world in check if they set their minds to it. But will it be enough? Okay, maybe Rayquaza has won every time they faced each other, but apparently a laser beam mutated the DNA of a space virus. I think nowadays it doesn't take much to imagine what such a virus could do, right? In battle, we see how the mutations have given it alarming capabilities, such as manipulating its molecular structure at will according to the situation. But the most frightening thing about Deoxys is that it has superior intelligence, something deadly for a virus. In the Delta episode, we see it swallow a meteorite that could have destroyed the Earth if Rayquaza and the protagonist had not intervened together, but the virus has already spread in the multiverse, and its version in the classic game seems to have been aware of the failure of that strategy, adapting and opting to infiltrate in a much smaller asteroid, which would go unnoticed by Rayquaza and landed in the most remote island in the universe. Even if the protagonist manages to get there and keep it at bay, it seems to be a threat that has already gotten completely out of control, and unless a truly superior being intervenes, all of its multiverse versions will continue with their plans by being aware of the rest. It may seem like I am exaggerating by placing it in the almost highest category, but yes, these are beings that threaten existence as we know it. Few clearer examples come to mind. Eternatus also comes from space, but is an even more fearsome visitor. It seeks to consume the world and take all the energy from it, which Rose would then try to take advantage of. The darkest day is nothing but that process. Eternatus stealing energy, and it would have succeeded but for the two heroes of Galar, who throughout sheer determination found its weak point and defeated it. But it's implied that unless both of them are together, none of the previous legendaries would have a chance to stop Eternatus. Only those from here on, who are a step above and have powers on a universal scale, could have faced it. The primordial chaos, Pokemon capable of breaking the very laws of the universe, their clashes giving results completely incomprehensible to us. And this level, it basically doesn't matter who's stronger or weaker, as they all have connotations that go far beyond a normal Pokemon battle. The Creation Trio is not as exciting to explain, as deities of time, space, and gravity respectively. They rule over laws that shape the universe as such. It becomes apparent then how irrelevant all the powers we have seen so far are in the face of them. One roar, and the reality is chaos. Can there be anything above that? Dude, they are going to kill me now. But the last mythical Pokemon is here for a good reason. Besides the legend of making anyone with it know nothing but victory, strong claims for a Pokemon that only increases an extra 10% accuracy in double and triple battles, all of its entries agree on its unlimited ability to generate energy. At this point of the video, I'm too tired to debate whether that's real, maybe it's just just a metaphor for Victini simply having a lot of energy, but if we go to its concept, maybe we can give it some credibility. It's the victory Pokemon, and it's said that anyone with Victini always wins, regardless of the circumstance. And in fact, the victory of trainers in battle is the very engine of the series. It represents such a fundamental pillar that makes me believe that it really has infinite energy. As such, it goes without saying how unlimited its potential would be. Not even space-time would be safe if this little being decided to release a sufficiently large amount of mass. Who could defeat something like this? Of all legendaries, Terrapagos is the one with the most mysterious powers and consequently the most hard to place in this ranking. With such feats as being, in its stellar form, the only Pokemon before even primordial entities that created the universe to be immune to the power of any Pokeball, even the Master Ball. Sure, you cannot catch any Pokemon in its terrestrial form without weakening it and removing that protection first, but keep in mind that Terrapagos is the origin of that energy, which makes it even more interesting. Not only did it achieve something that no other creature could in it, but in all the Pokemon in the region that were imbued with its energy. It's a Pokemon that appears to have a different essence from the others. Rather than power or energy as such, it seems to have some sort of ability to distort reality. The crystals on their own, which are apparently a byproduct of its existence and contain a minuscule portion of its power, are already capable of manifesting events equal to a dream. The whole story and events of the 9th generation also feel like a dream in some way, and everything is caused by the existence of this being. In battle, the protagonist and Kieran together, don't forget that they are the two most powerful champions in the region, managed to get rid of its stellar form to catch it, but I have the feeling that this fight is not representative of its real skills. Consider this place as one in which I could put it purely by intuition, but it could well be below or higher. Eons ago, Necrozma inhabited the Ultra Space and released so much energy that it was like the sun to a multitude of worlds that indirectly received a part of it throughout Ultra Wormholes. Imagine what we are talking about. But one day, a very technologically advanced civilization of the universe saw the end of its days near and tried to take advantage of that infinite energy. Looks like Rose was ahead of his time, huh? Of course, they didn't get away with it, but they did manage to affect Necrozma, making its life a constant suffering. Necrozma, in desperation, wandered throughout countless worlds, search of some light, extinguishing them and bringing chaos in its wake. Those responsible for this felt guilty and tried to correct their mistake, being unable to defeat Necrozma, but managed to trap it in a tower of light to satiate its hunger and temporarily contain it. But in the events of the game, it escapes, and what would have become of the universe had it not been for the protagonist and Malasadas? Victini has unlimited energy, yeah, but Necrozma is its nemesis, being able to absorb energy without a limit, or at least there's no indication that it has one because of its past consuming and extinguishing countless worlds. No matter how much Victini released, even enough to wipe out a galaxy, it could only make Necrozma stronger, perhaps until it reached its former splendor again. And, well, the truth is that there is little mystery here, but what would really happen if these two were to face each other? Despite the series having reference to Arceus as the creator of the world, it also points to it being more of an embodiment, worldly and in Pokemon form, of that energy that moves all things. beings, which makes sense of the fact that we can catch it. After all, it's just a Pokemon. Maybe the different Arceus we face throughout the series are each one of those arms, with the 1000 actually being a symbolic number of the infinite Arceus that represent the world in each universe. Well, I said I wasn't going to start making theories. The fact is that if we accept this hypothesis, who would win between the true Arceus as a universal being that spreads its arms into a reality, and Ultra Necrozma with the infinite energy that it stole from Victini and it's able to use at will? In both cases, we are talking about beings theoretically without limits within their own reality, so